again, telenovelas are not just things that make money. They are that, for sure. But they're actually a very complex side of mediations and representations. They're hour-long melodramatic narratives that are broadcast daily, Monday through Saturday. They last about from 6 to 9 months, depending if it's really successful. Then the audience, might like it so much that you want to keep them going, and then you can make it longer. And they're just an integral part of Brazilian culture. Some of the themes range from politics, to race, health, gender, current events. It's told in real time. So a Monday is a Monday. Christmas is Christmas, right? We live at the same time that those characters live. They're huge exports. They're these transnational product. In 2005, TV Globo sold 44,000 hours of its programming to 53 countries. And I know that 2005 is an old source, right? This is the first thing I would tell my students, find something a little more recent, right? But TV Globo is so secretive about their numbers and how much money they make, it's really, really hard to find any sources. So it's a miracle I found that one. They charge up to $100,000 per episode shown overseas with a profit margin of 50%. These numbers, of course, they tell us that there's high ratings domestically and internationally. And it also tells us that if you have high ratings, then the profitability for marketing is high because TV sells audience to advertisers, right? As far as the production of Brazilian telenovelas, along with the audience's expectations of the genre itself, as far as form, style, codes of television, the general understanding, as the initial quote told us, is that they're co-authored by a variety of different agents, and one of them, the audience members. The open text. So anything can happen when a telenovela is being written and produced and watched. Plot twists, new characters, deaths, and ghosts or the evil twin. And that usually happens when you kill that favorite character and then the audience hates you, and so you fix the problem with little ghosts or something like that. Because as long as the actor is back, right? So the story, open text, the story is written at the same time that the episodes air, and the public's reaction to the telenovela is very much taken into account. It's this integration that characterizes telenovelas as open art form. Of course, they're open in Brazil. When they're exported, they're not open anymore. And TV Globo works very hard at really knowing the audience and the reaction to the telenovelas. So the anonymous viewer is incorporated to this dynamics of making the telenovela, and the making of these telenovelas, and TV Globo has 4 telenovelas that air every day. It's a relationship between the professionals amongst themselves and then them and the public. And this relationship is mediated by the media and power relationships, of course. Little more as far as the production technique behind it. Writers are responsible for writing 6 chapters every week. Producers are responsible for taping blocks of 6 chapters weekly, which corresponds to an average of 40 pages a day. This encourages and allows for the open text characteristic. You can make minor changes and shoot the episode that is a scene for the episode that's airing that night, that day. So it's true that the open text is a production element that operates as a commercial strategy that develops this captive audience for the telenovela, of course, and to generate profit. But I'm looking at how the way it was used in this specific telenovela where the guy who was very famous died, allowed for the possibility of actually shooting it a different way, making it look different on screen. Velushik was a rural telenovela. For the 8 o'clock slot, there's a tradition of switching between an urban and a rural telenovela. That's another commercial strategy that allows everybody in Brazil to feel like they are represented. It premiered March 14, 2016, and ended in September. It's a traditional melodrama, story of forbidden love, family saga through 3 different generations, but it's also about sustainable agriculture, the environment, and the famous river, real-life river, the São Francisco River, which is this river, which was discovered 515 years ago. It cuts through 5 states, 505 Brazilian municipalities. It has been losing its vitality due to pollution, etc. So it was very much a political telenovela with melodramatic aspects. And so it had Santo, the character, as a main character, but it also had the river itself as a main character. And he died right after, like a couple of hours after shooting a scene that would air a couple of days later. He was swimming with his love interest in the telenovela. And just to show you a little bit of the blurring between reality and fiction, on the day that he drowned on that river, that night, one of the main characters in that telenovela was drowning in that same river. And so it was very spooky and sad and tragic. And people were talking about it online as they're watching the telenovela. There's an example of a tweet. Velushik already used to scare me because it used a lot of mysticism. But watching this scene where one of the characters is drowning in the same day that the actor drowned is just bizarre. Also, there was this boat in the telenovela that would appear every now and then when somebody died to take the soul of that person to heaven or whatever, right? And they see that same boat the night that he passed away in the river. Can you read? Oh, and so actually the day he disappeared and drowns in the river at night, he had also been missing because of the river, but in the telenovela, the river brings him back. In real life, people are saying the river did not bring him back. And we have a couple minutes, and I want to show you a little clip. So I'll skip some slides, but usually in the past, when this happened, what did they do? They wrote the person's death into the telenovela so that then you could account for them being dead. Or they would like say the person went away to a trip abroad, and then they would use flashbacks, etc. In this telenovela, they went with a subjective camera. And so they used audio that had been previously recorded, and so it was like a ghost speaking. It was strange, but also stimulating when you think of production, what you can do. And then camera movement, the subjective camera standing in for the actor. I'm gonna show you a couple of images. So this is an image of his love interest talking to us, or him, specifically the camera, and there would be blurs, and like out of focus that would represent tears, and you would hear stuff that he had said in previous telenovelas. He's also able to go to his son's wedding, and he's very much there. He never died in the telenovela. He was always present, and his presence is very much felt. This is another scene where they're looking at Santo or us. It's an uncomfortable position as an audience member because you know he's dead, but you are standing in for him, and so is the camera. So I'm just gonna show you this clip. And this is on the day This is on the day of his daughter's wedding. And as you saw, the camera represents him lying down. He's lying down. The camera has this point of view of a person lying down, and his brother is saying, "I can't believe you're like taking a nap." while your daughter and your son, another long story, it's the daughter and the son getting married, but they discovered they were adopted. Right? You know, come, you know, and he's like, now he's talking about how he's fixing his tie. And so the camera is the guy who died, right? And at some point he sprays perfume. And those, the internet's a little sorry. And so actually there were about 10 episodes where this subjective camera was used in this very unique and different way.
Impressive.
All right. Thank you. All right, Rob?
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll go with there. Move around a little bit and stay cool as possible. Now, I'm not nearly as good with time as Sam, it appears to be. And that was like uncanny good time.
I'm going to take your seat multiple.
So I will have like triple redundancies here. I'll also have my timer. And hopefully look at it periodically, 15 minutes. Okay, so I'm in the midst. I'm in the midst of this work. It's a multi-method empirical project. I've been trying over the past decade or so to add some empirical support and grounded data to support some of the kind of sky-high postulates and probes of McLuhan and his active media theory. Oh, yes, let's blow it out nice and large. Thank you. Sort of a truncated abstract here. Just very quickly, the American Academy of Pediatrics, if you weren't aware of this, since 1999 they had established recommendations for screen time use for children, particularly children 24 months and younger, 2 years and younger. And there was a couple of reasons for this. At the time, they were really, they put these in place as the television screen in the American home was beginning to be eclipsed by computer screens of various kinds. I mean, we've had computers in American homes since like the early 1980s, but that tipping point was starting to happen in the late 90s. And personal screens of all kinds, right? Portability of laptops, and laptops were getting kind of portable at that time. I think mine weighed 11 pounds or something in the late 90s. But screens were becoming, as they say, ubiquitous, and that word will come back again because one of my research participants used that term, as well as a client, a patient of one of the nurses that I've been interviewing. In fact, Monday and Tuesday. Monday I interviewed 2 parents, and Tuesday, just the day before I came, an RN who specializes in pediatrics. So I'm trying to get a nice stakeholder set. Now I've bolstered some of this with EEG research in the past, sort of neurophysiological studies. And one of the things, just real quick, just very quick here, I'm going to show this to you. To try to show support or test, if you will, one of McLuhan's early probes. He was saying that screens versus pages, we're going to get different types of outputs in the brain. He was fascinated with the bicameral brain. In fact, Robert Logan tells me that he gave McLuhan the first poster that he put on his wall in a little cottage at the University of Toronto. So he was always thinking about the biological, neurological relationship between media and humans. Now, we found an inversion of the original research that Krugman, his first name, Herbert Krugman, 1971. It was actually just a case study, one subject. And they found, so if you know anything about EEG, brainwave patterns, the alpha has much more dull, not as high frequency, and that suggests a kind of lull, pre-sleep, a little bit hypnotic state. And Krugman had found with his research participant that the television screen, fixing for content as much as they could, reading from the television screen. We don't see a lot of words on television screens these days other than the scrolling often, or on Sesame Street sometimes, but the scrolling in the news. The bottom would be the screen condition. We found something, as I say, that was inverted. The screen condition now is very different, right? The LCD, the liquid crystal display, is very different than the cathode ray tube, the electron gun, the televisions that were being used in the early 1970s still. So this is interesting. What it suggests is, well, something different is going on. People are falling asleep a bit now when they're reading from books. The sample size, of course, was that convenience sample, the low-hanging fruit, the freshmen in the freshman courses, like Concurrent 10 course. But we looked at 12 participants and all up through, freshmen and sophomore, a couple of juniors, and maybe a few seniors. And we found overall that there was this kind of inversion. Some students looked palpably just uncomfortable while they were reading from books even. They don't seem to interface with pages as often. A lot of them report reading from screens. In any case, I'm not going to talk, that's a whole other project. This project was inspired as I wanted to extend some of that other work and look now at very young children interfacing with screens, but also really inspired by that flip, largely a flip in policy, not a complete 180-degree turn, but in 2016 the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, updated those recommendations and pulled back a lot of those restrictions. Actually went down to 18 months, a year and a half, and said kids can use screens for video chatting of various kinds, FaceTime, Skype, those sorts of things, to talk to grandma, grandpa, dad over in Afghanistan or what have you. The concern, of course, by some of the therapists and pediatricians and teachers and some of the parents that I talked to was, well, this is sort of like, they didn't maybe use the word slippery slope, but they were suggesting that we don't quite use it for that, or they're not just using it for that, they're using it for other purposes as well. So sort of opens the door, right, if you've got a kid who's a year and a half old. And you can see these distinctions. One of my, in my senior seminar and in a couple of independent studies these days, I put some kids to work to analyze all of the research that these two different sets of recommendations were based on. They kept updating it and getting stiffer and stiffer through 2011, and those held until 2015, until they made this kind of policy flip in large measure. Now, I'm testing, I'm trying to illustrate support, or maybe we'll find lack of support, for a fast and slow media distinction, and of course the neutral versus active theory of technology. That technologies are not just neutral tools that we use to accomplish tasks, but they might have, if you will, ends or telos in mind, if you will, as Bob was saying in his plenary. Sam, interesting, it's related. Sam, your talk on telenovelas, I mean, you were showing us a kind of medium-fast technology, the telenovela. So this does, we can do more content. And the way most of these, what we call daytime dramas or soap operas, similar kind of thing, they're not quite real time, right? I mean, they celebrate certain things at about the right time, but 60 minutes of the show, not actually 60 minutes are going by, right? So it's they solve problems fairly quickly related to the real world, right? So that is considered sort of a medium-fast example. Fast versus slow media. Screens, when we're web searching, when we're texting, these are very, very fast changes, sometimes of context or interlocutor, if you will. Web searches moving all around in not linear ways, versus slow media context, paper, reading, the linear sequential nature of text, right? You have to follow it in a linear sequential order to get the content. Conversations, interpersonal conversations are linear and sequential, and turn-taking, that's considered a slow media context. Lectures, very much so, you have to attend, right? And discussions even as well, with the turn-taking in class. So I was sort of, if you will, tapping into those ideas, trying to illustrate those ideas. There's other more personal inspirations for this project. On the left there is my younger son, Owen. He sort of had this habit when he was really young. Right there he's about 2. And he would just go into bookstores. This is Portsmouth, New Hampshire, just north of Boston. And he would just grab books, right? He's not quite reading it. He's looking at the pages. He's looking at the pictures. He's maybe recognizing a few of these characters, the pattern recognition of those characters. And he's starting to figure it out. At 7 now, he's becoming a pretty good reader. He can nail most of the Curious George books and all of that. Well, this is to be contrasted with, sort of some of the media habits that we're seeing. This is Friends of the Family. It's a representation of both pre and post Thanksgiving dinner is actually of 2015. And so these are the cousins hanging out together, and I didn't cherry pick this image. It's quite common these days, and my students in the senior seminar show me similar pictures. We're sort of seeing this cultural shift. It's becoming a very common pattern that we can recognize. Now, why is all this important? What do I got here? Okay, so the key thing here is that infant brains undergo massive growth in the first 2 years, especially into 3 years, even, and then it starts to slow down a bit. It doesn't really finish until the end of puberty. But interestingly enough, the human brain maintains about 86 billion neurons. It doesn't change really the number of neurons. Most of the growth, most of the increase in mass is due to what they call myelination of the nerve fibers. And myelination, just very quickly, it's sort of proteins and lipids that form around the axons where the electrical transmission is happening between the dendrites. If you look at them under a microscope, it kind of looks like links of sausages. And the more myelination, the more insulation to the signal, and the higher transmission rate and pure the signal is. So you might have heard this term synaptic pruning. 5 minutes left. Some of the cliches that might go along with that is, if you don't use it, you lose it. Another Canadian here, Donald Hebb, in 1949, he coined the phrase "neurons that fire together, wire together." These are other, sort of manifestations of that idea of synaptic pruning, and signals tend to follow the easiest path. So with increased myelination, well, that's because those pathways are being used. And so we can talk about a screen condition or a page condition. We do actually see a shift toward the left hemisphere a bit, a little bit more growth there as we're starting to learn language. But if we're not learning language, if we're not interfacing with the word, either the spoken word, more so says Merriam-Wolf, the written word, if we're not doing that, we're not developing those pathways. Okay, and so this is really important, and it's why I was taken aback by this policy shift, as well as a few, not many. I've not talked to many pediatricians yet, only 3. I hope to get up to about 5 or 8. But according to them, about half of the pediatricians they know, first of all, communicated the original information to their family, to the patients and the families, the parents of their patients. The other half just kind of didn't, they knew about it. It didn't seem to be something that was also taken very seriously by the parents. And there's a few reasons for that, right? It's very convenient to use the screens. Let me show you a couple of images. These things are real. There's just a reiteration of the guidelines, which I kind of already stated for you guys. So this is real. I mean, the iPod is a real thing. I forget the company that markets that. Fisher Price is the marketer, the company that put this thing out, the Aptivity Seat. I've got some videos that if you email me, I can send them, or you can probably find them online. But this is for real, right? And so what's good potentially about this, the kids learning a kind of multitasking, while they're interfacing with the screen, and you've got all the wonderful things about it there in the promotional material. They also make one that's not a multitasking device. It's just a seat, so the kid can sort of orient front and center with the screen device, and it doesn't have the basin. This one here, it's really expensive for what you think it is. It's really just one of those little shaker things, and it's got space for an iPad, right? They made a deal with Apple there. And you can get these apps. And if I clicked on that lower video, you will see a bird's eye view, a kid's eye view, an infant's eye view. And one of the things they can do is they can pull on those toys that are hanging from the bottom of the screen, and that will make objects on the screen sort of fall off or topple away, or the monkey will climb up the tree as you're pulling on it. And then they can do this kind of poking thing on the screen, and it can make little butterflies start to fly out of a tree or something like that. And so what we're doing here, what we see, is a lot of fun when we look at it as parents and say the kid's focused, the kid's quiet, the kid's amused. But what's actually happening is the feedback loop between the animal and the environment is being impoverished in lots of ways, right? So as opposed to actually maybe manipulating a kind of little plastic tree or something. They're just tapping. They're really narrowing the bandwidth of the human interface with the environment, right? And we're seeing structural changes to the brain, which starts to get into an epigenetic argument, if you're familiar with that, changes to the genome, after the code has been set down. So this might be pretty damn significant as we move into the future here and do longitudinal studies with those new generations that are growing up with these things. 60 seconds left. So in many ways, we're actually teaching our machines in more holistic and robust ways than our little humans these days. This is an older construct at MIT. I met Ripley a few years back. Ripley comes from like 2004 or 2006. Jerry Turkle introduced me to a couple of these along with Gadget, I forgot the other one. It's just sort of a face, looks like one of the gremlins from that movie. But this is really just a robotic arm with a bunch of AI. It has pressure sensors, it has visual. I think they were working on an olfactory sensory mechanism, but it feels the apple lifted up, it feels its heft, it feels how dense it is. So this could be very, very consequential to the future as we continue to teach our young computers and young AIs in these very robust ways. This is my older son when he was younger, Charlie. He had a penchant for painting birdhouses for grandmas and grandpas and whatnot. There's my time. It's apparently less common these days as I've been talking to students and as I've been talking to some of the pediatricians, more nurses, because my school has a big nursing department. Parents are just not describing interfaces with 3D physical objects as much with their little ones as opposed to this 2D, as I call it, impoverished environment. And that's just a smattering of what I have planned as we move into some of the next phases of this. Thank you.
All right, Wilson, Oliveira.
I would like to ask if the time control girl can take pictures every time you show me the time I have. So in the end of my presentation, I can make a GIF or a GIF of this presentation. I'm always trying to align my practice as a GIF maker, and I say things like that with my presentations,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
Do you want the card in the picture or just the picture of you? Doesn't matter.
Be free to do whatever.
Okay.
You'll be so kind.
Creative license.
While I was preparing my presentation, I had two papers and this year at Media College convention. While I was preparing this, I cut off a lot of pages and I didn't count that I had to explain a little something before I start, so I had to cut more while I'm presenting. Sorry for my bad English, sorry for my bad accent. While I was living in Chicago doing part of my PhD there, my English was much better, but then I came to Brazil back and my second language became really my first language again. This paper is the first paper I'm presenting. It's an essay, and the first essay of my postdoctoral stage I'm making at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and it's called A Night for a Year, a gift from the film. And with the word film here, I take the opportunity to say that I'm here for two papers and for launching my McLuhan cinema book. Anyone who wants it, just look me after it. The book was forwarded by Eric McLuhan and Andrew McLuhan. It's such an honor to be here. Obrigado, Samantha. Thanks, Samantha. Having a Brazilian in this table is great. So you can help me with my English. As I said, while I was preparing, I decided to cut some pages off, and I'll cut some more and taking the time with you. As proposed by the Italian philosopher Giambattista Vico, the Corsi and Ricorsi method was thinking the world in constantly motion, in a twisting of our ideas. In his new science, this great critic of Cartesianism, history unfolds in a series of cycles, in comings and goings. My goal here is to approach some media ecology issues through the perspective of the GIF spirit in the contemporary art, so to understand this new visual and audio-visual practice. While I was seeing in this GIF, or GIF here, as the author of the extension, the creator of the extension, said that we were pronouncing it wrong. While I first saw this GIF or GIF, it reminded me at the same time Queen's We Will Rock You song. And I was reading for the 10th time McLuhan chapter on Man Changed an Eye for an Ear. And I thought, what is happening with an image with no sound, and I'm only hearing it. As Professor Robert Key Logan said today, hearing is believing in the GIF world for me. And this is what this project of postdoctoral research is about. Continue here, this GIF spirit in the contemporary art creates a new audiovisual practice, composing a symphony of elements in order to understand the cyclic, repetitive and repeatable images. Enter the GIF, sorry, enter the ghost, re-enter the ghost, sorry, re-enter the GIF. And it sounds. And like the movies from the silent era, GIFs have no sounds. But we know that there were sounds during a cinema of attraction section. From a small orchestra, from a man narrating the story, and from one important thing that we put aside, that was the noise of the projector. While we are seeing these GIFs, we are with our open ear hearing all kinds of things, as I've heard the famous We Will Rock You song from that GIF. That was my way for a whole new world of GIFs. Then I found Mr. McLuhan funny GIF, as acting as a DJ, acting as an editor, acting as a viewer, and this is one of the few examples of McLuhan's GIFs I have found, and it's much more in the memes world, but it's repeatable and a sequence of new repetitions that I can figure out some sounds when McLuhan is scratching his equipment, when he is seeing SpongeBob or something like that. But let's be serious again. Then great McLuhan GIF I found that allowed me to get into this new project, this idea of pattern recognition, that is synthesis of McLuhan's thought, and how GIF operates it, and how we can be creative thinking and adding our sounds to it. GIFs, these images that spin in loops at various speed rates with their different colors and references, represents the circle as harmoniously universal. The idea of the circle as something that is harmonious, like the infinity symbol. And through this creating and sharing repetitive images, I seek to understand how the receiver becomes a creator and can add sounds, turning the idea of the interchange between eye and ear, again, a question for us. if we trade an eye for an ear in the name of the printing, now with this new visual world, what are we doing with sounds? I'm always researching on GIFs, listening to something, and they somehow enter, and somehow I become a kind of DJ of my GIFing. And if the word VJ started to be used, putting away the idea of the VJ as a video clip guy that presents it for an audience, VJ started to create in real time audiovisual performances, as some people calls live cinema. It's an expression that appeared in the Ramidial release for the press in 2005. But cinema has ever one day been not alive. The projectionist was not there. Like telenovelas, you film at the same day and you put it on the air. But now with this online time, this real time from the online, you know what's going in the telenovela before you see it, before you watch it. The final chapters of telenovelas, you always have to film to record 2 different finals, 2 different endings, because the audience already guess, or because of this oral world that we still live, people know what is gonna happen. And GIFs called my attention, and this is some questions I'd like to discuss with you. And this is, as I said, a new project from my postdoctoral that I started a couple of months ago. And as I said, I cut a lot of pages, they are all cut here. But going Mr. Marshall McLuhan, I think that the GIF maker, this guy that is aware that sound is not distant as the audience may imagine. Mr. McLuhan has a beautiful quote that I'm going to read here. It's a little bit long, and I'm looking for the time. Are you making my pictures?
I am.
Thank you. Mr. McLuhan once said, "The experimental artist is always constructing models of future situations that provide reliable headlights for social navigation. The social scientist can only talk about current patterns of taste, as he does not have the same access to the future patterns that artist has always had. And the reason for this is simply that the artist, as Wyndham Lewis once said, is committed to writing a true history of the present because he is aware of the unused potential of the present." So we are making GIFs, but as I said, I'm here because of this GIF I will make after this presentation. And as a social scientist, I'm here just pontificating maybe wrong ideas that GIFs have sounds. But when I saw that Brian Eno quote, joking with "the medium is the message," with that ambience, with that ground, and the old McLuhan idea of figure and ground, coming from a musician like Brian Eno. And I'll try to listen to some Brian Eno songs that I love with this GIF. And the phrase, the quote, become totally wrong for me. The medium and not the tedium is the message. And I hope I have not bored you and confused you with my experimental here. I'm okay, 3 minutes. So I didn't bother. There's another quote from Mr. McLuhan that I would like to explore here. It's the idea that appears on Understanding Media of hyperesthetics. It's a term used in Understanding Media that Mr. McLuhan has not used it. I have never seen outside that specific part of Understanding Media. And the idea of hyper-aesthetic is that mediatic systems are all-inclusive. And after that, Mr. McLuhan considered TV audio tactile. And watching your screens in this screen, even being a projection, was fantastic for me because I couldn't see your child on this picture that was here, but when I moved myself, I saw it was here, and then I understood what you were saying. But after this idea of hyperesthetics, Mr. McLuhan has a beautiful quote that helps me a lot with this idea of thinking GIFs not only with our visual forms, our visual world, and the idea is on page 54 of my version of Understanding Media, the 1994 version. The printed book encouraged artists to reduce all forms of expression as much as possible to the single descriptive and narrative plane of the printed world. The advent of electric media released art from this straitjacket at once, creating the world of Oakley, Picasso, Braque, Eisenstein, the Marx Brothers, and James Joyce. And by extending this, creating, I think, our GIF or GIF era. And I have 60 seconds, but I think I'd rather show GIFs than. This is a GIF from a year. It's not stellar years. It's not stellar. The Australian artist that implanted a year in his art. It's not his. It's a year within a year. And this is my latest project that is called Anthropophagiff. It's a film being made exclusively with GIFs. We are getting scenes with eyes and ears and using the idea of Brazilian modernism, of Brazilian modernism, anthropophagia. We are kind of eating the GIFs and throwing it back with a movie. It will be a 90 minutes movie with GIFs. And it came from a student that in a class I was teaching in Rio said to me, I'm trying to watch a streetcar named Desire only with GIFs. And I said, where is it in this website? And I tried to do so, and I spent 5 minutes and I couldn't watch it anymore. And so I thought to myself, I have to make a film that I can be able to watch, because I can't watch a narrative film, such a classic like that, in the GIF format. These are few insights I'm having in this new research. It will be great to hear from you while our conversation after it. Thank you very much.
All right, now we have William Allen from Florida Southern College.
I have no visuals for you guys today, but I'm going to take a 360 here for All right. You guys are all in this shot together, so let's see. Wilson, I think I'm a hard G rather than a soft G. I can give my rationale later. I like the Dolly piece as well. I'm from Florida, so the heat feels really good to me right now. Sorry about you guys. About 15 years ago, around this time, I was giving my vows in Minnesota as well. So I'm thinking about that right now, so I'm going to share this with you guys. So the title of my piece here is called Pixelated Domes, Restructuring Space and Singularity Through 360. Bear with my words, I suppose, instead of my visuals. Within the milieu of technological change, residue of orality continues to saturate human experience with new agreements and patterns forming new languages. With increased reliance on the electronic grid weighing down the pursuit of individual balance, Swin Burkertz, in his book Changing the Subject, explains new technological languages shatter old supporting structures, yet at the same time fosters a new model of disengaged engagement. Burkertz feels this as a loss of our sense of being grounded in our material reality. Understanding change demands an authentic refocus away from the blurry, flickering pixels of virtual immersion pulsating through the reflective glass. The capacity to refocus and reflect on the pervasive changes requires an understanding of previous media forms and its underlying impact on singularity. As 360-degree technology, this fully immersive video crawls towards the mass market, function is not yet determined beyond entertainment value. VR filmmaker Chris Milk, if you haven't checked him out, he does some really amazing work. Wilderness Downtown was his piece, which I think was a really breakthrough piece. States that 360-degree video is the first medium that actually makes the jump from our internalization of an author's expression of an experience to our experiencing it firsthand. So using 360-degree technologies places the viewer at the center of a story, restructuring the senses previously established through traditional forms of visual media. So with mixed media forms and human factors, 360-degree technologies restructure space, undermining singularity. Interactive 360-degree mixed media forms are not simply flashy additions to that technological catalog. The continuous cycle that we're in of this orientation and action necessitates an appreciation of that transitional symbolic form, as well as the physical. Using Walter Ong's orality literacy perspective, new media scholar Jay Bolter inspects the transitional power of computer-mediated communication. Bolter begins this journey by defining the technology of writing. Really fascinating with writing. Go check out my documentary on the pencil after we're done today. According to Bolter, writing technologies are methods for arranging verbal ideas in a visual space. So accepting writing, whether ancient or modern, has a constant presence in our mental state, establishes the existence of remediation. Bolter explains remediation as the new and the old coexisting. So-called new media is constantly borrowing and reorganizing the characteristics of writing in the older medium and reforming its cultural space. With this in mind, having a historical perspective helps understand the restructuring of writing space within the pixelated 360 dome. So understanding change as a natural technological transformation invade the human consciousness is the focus of Ong's and Burkert's work. Rather than freely accepting pseudo-deified technological advancements, Ong and Burkertz recognize enhancement of previous technological innovations, yet are able to address the reversals. Ong's established literate supposition states that writing has transformed human consciousness. Ong's absoluteness is a result, I think, of his cultural literate lens. His absoluteness runs contrary to Burkert's cultural domain, which exists in postmodernism. Burkertz is quick to address the subjectivity of defining consciousness, yet recognizes a subtle, elusive, technological change agent as being very real. Although Ong and Burkertz differ in their epistemology of technology, they both agree that technology is augmenting the individual's perception and information processing. In spite of their cultural prejudices, Ong and Burkert's address technology as the artificial interpretation of self-awareness through created symbology. So progressing from orality to writing, Ong deems the unnatural process of writing an enhancement to the consciousness. As senses are disrupted through the physicality of writing, time is reversed into thinking about the form rather than the act of speaking. Burkert's recognizes the magical appeal of speed and efficiency, flaunted by shiny new devices, and sides with Ong, suggesting a fight to preserve the slower. So moving beyond Ong and Burkert's cultural lens, 360 filmmaker Milk defines consciousness as a feeling of reality that we get from our senses experiencing the world around us. So in understanding media, McLuhan brings a similar analysis explaining human beings wear its brain outside its skull and its nerves outside its hide. McLuhan seems to explore the possibility of reorienting consciousness. However, in this analysis, McLuhan views consciousness as the interpreting mechanism. As 360-degree cinematic language continues to unfold and shape story development, Chris Milk considers first-person POV, which we recognized in our earlier session that this is awkward, but he recognizes that the first-person POV in 360-degree video is the prime mechanism to place your consciousness as the medium. Morton Halig, in his essay El Cine del Futuro, seeks to say, basically states that the nervous system is the seat of consciousness, contributing to the reception of the whole. Halig believes that the cinema of the future, beyond virtual reality, will no longer be a visual art, but an art of consciousness. I'll get that if you want me to. A major shift takes place as Halig connects consciousness to sense impressions, challenging cinema towards action. That's awesome color. This transition requires active participation from the spectator. Milk echoes Halig's call to action and believes that virtual reality can bridge the gap. As you are in the pixelated dome, Milk says that you are on the tundra hunting with the clan leader, or you are the clan leader, or maybe you're even the woolly mammoth. So moving beyond the symbolic form of restructured writing spaces, 360-degree video technology remediates the physical form. And I see this sort of previously attached to mixed reality experiences. Bolter claims that virtual reality continues to remediate classical film production, stating that rivalry and homage seems always to be at work. Within remediation, Bolter suggests cultures wrestle with a constant dichotomy between seeing through the medium, he calls it transparency, or desiring hypermediacy, which is an intense awareness of the form. As 360-degree filmmakers begin to shape fully immersive stories through grammar of cinematic language, transparency and hypermediacy, I think are constantly battling. So if we're to look back in film history, we see, we explore this idea of camera displacement. We can bring in continuity that sort of takes away from seeing the medium itself. We can look at that, consider that. And I think with 360 video, the singular camera softens the need for continuity because we don't have all those camera displacements that you would see in previous forms. Early on as well, continuity breaks were avoided in narrative and documentary work to enhance the voyeuristic elements of the plot. When that break occurs, viewers become aware and shift attention back to the real world. This oscillation breaks the illusion, undermining the authentic experience. So for example, in 360-degree video, if you've noticed and if you've experienced it, some mounts allow for like 6 separate cameras to stitch together a singular image. However, I think the software limitations pull us to actually see these stitched images, and it sort of breaks the transparency of the medium, and then you're sort of pulled out of where you are, I suppose. Now, we do have movements as well in film history that give us like this intentional breaking of the fourth wall. We saw it in the very opening session as well, and that's the pull the viewer out of the illusion was the historical piece there. I saw that you had a GIF on Vertov. So Vertov opposed the escapism mentality of early films and broke away to create Man with the Camera. So these various category breaks help define weaknesses within the illusion of both traditional filmmaking and virtual reality. I'm going to skip through here a little bit, but in 2016, VR Data Network said that we had 6.3 million virtual headsets, and I think the headset is really a remediation of the vaudeville peep show. And that shipped out to users worldwide. You know, I could really address Thomas Kuhn here. I could talk through the structure of scientific revolution, say that it has some really interesting things there to say how paradigms occur, and we're closely there, but we're still not there. And all that to say, I think the medium is not yet complete. So I'm going to transition now to look at some of the human factors. Being at the forefront of the new medium produces idealistic vision. I'm very much there. I'm that idealistic person that wants to use it, wants to create within it. However, 360-degree technological pursuits of authentic experiences take part in reshaping singularity. Extending Thomas Nagel's essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, Stefano Giulini explores the possibilities of unveiling virtual substitutes to the self through mediated digital technologies. Giulini believes that digital technologies are the base negotiation between humans and reality, enabling new perceptions of reality. He notes transitions from Plato to Dadaism to written language as forms of mediation that can move beyond describing to evoking what could be possible. Within the idealistic vision of 360-degree video development, common mantra, I think, reinforces the endless possibilities of taking the user anywhere. Milk states VR makes us feel like we are part of something. Milk believes the grand narrative of humanity is actively pursuing the identity of being a part of global citizenship. Burkhardt describes this collective tribalism as the hive life and warns against the shifting sands of singularity. The pursuit of collective virtual experiences moving beyond our context via 360-degree video are making ourselves that much more fit to be nodes in a larger system, that much less independent selves. As the restructured hive identity takes hold, an active pursuit to blur boundaries of place undermines locality. In The Saturated Self, Dilemmas of Identity in Contemporary Life, Kenneth Gurdon explains biological substitutes of self are contributing factors to losing the real person. The user has handed over their rights of vision to the machine's selection of camera placement, altering perceptions. This seems to be the primary focus of 360-degree video. Placing on the head-mount device, the user is stepping into a continuous flow of the first-person POV of another person, replacing their consciousness with someone else's. Although determining who or what consciousness the user invokes, Gurdon believes this consciousness of construction receives different implications based on how that pseudo-person is treated. For example, as the faces of Aleppo children smile at the user through the 360 video HMD, who are they as the user? Has the user taken on a new consciousness undermining singularity? Is this consciousness pattern stamped upon all users of this particular vid? If so, does that reconstructed identity have any implications on how the user responds? As the user is placed in a different locale, but language allows a sense of relatedness. This is a breakdown, I think, within the medium. Although 360-degree video, the user is co-present in place, but the active two-way exchange of language is non-existent, reducing a sense of grounding. Finding societal grounding inside the hive life requires questioning reality within 360-degree virtual spaces in spite of the idealistic vision of hypermediation. In his article, Superimposing Reality on Digital Spaces, Alec Hosterman states the residue of earlier forms are the benchmark for new familiarities. Although the pursuit of reality is admirable, Hosterman believes that human beings are only supplanting a narrow understanding of the real on a select group of pixels. By altering a group of pixels, the sign is manipulated, causing the objective immovable reality to shift, disrupting the real. A task that he feels is too easily manipulated through digital environments. I'm going to skip here. In a visual-based society, image is the durable advocate for assigning actuality. However, seeing is believing formulates a bias towards knowing, which is propagated through selective visual imagery. Along with mixed media technologies, a blend of human factors such as language, cognition, agreements, and patterns establishes a dualism to shape perceptions. As the durable image continues to bend beyond the 16:9 aspect ratio toward 360 degrees, whether that is language categories, agreements, and patterns that are not in existence, humans need the capacity to refocus and reflect. Burkhardt finds it unsettling that the perceived reality shift, the changed culture, has completely undermined that former power of exhortation. that the so-called real world has been vaporized or virtualized. Burgert's provides a charge to reclaim the true identity of the 18th century Luddite and hold tightly to self-preservation in this coming age of the pixelated 360-degree dome.
I have a quick announcement before you folks head out. So the MEA board will meet in the founders room for lunch, and you are all to meet over by the coffee service outside. So just a heads
Also,
up.
we have 5 minutes for question and answer. And also, since lunch is afterwards, we can stay a little bit longer if you guys want, or we can eat and talk, which is also good. But feel free to ask any questions. I'm so sorry. But thank you all. I wonder if we can do this now.
Yeah.
We're supposed to turn this off because of the recording. Should I go for it? Yes.
I have a question for Rob.
Yeah.
Rob, you were characterizing the conversation as linear or
Slow media context,
I'm wondering
sequential.
how you would account for what we might think of as hyperlinking when someone interjects and the subject
Change. Okay, yeah, so I tried to make a point that interpersonal, dyad. So that would be a pure form of that. And then a lecture, some professors prefer that mode. Sage on the stage type of thing, distinctly slow media context. They don't always pay attention, but that's how it's formatted. But then a discussion is, a little bit less so. Maybe I didn't point that out, but I had it as a descending scale. A discussion would be a little bit faster and disjunctive, non-linear. That's interjections from students and others. Interruption.
right, that was going to be my next question. So
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah. You got that basic distinction, fast media context. Texting would be a good example of that, back and forth. The web search, often non-linear and disjunctive.
I have a question for you as well, and I'm not totally sure how to phrase it, so I'm going to try. If there are two sides to Beyond about screens and youth, I'm on your side. But I have a question about the idea that in the workforce, we're moving away from our skills and abilities and into being able to manipulate robots that do the tasks for us. Like the common idea that the best preparation for becoming a brain surgeon is playing video games. I don't know if you ever hear people say that the technology is moving in that direction. What is your feeling on that, that we have to actually build the skill to do the tapping well more than we have to build the skill to put the pieces together with our hands?
Yeah, so with surgery or surgery at a distance, we've been doing that for a while. I think most of the surgeons, it's the same kind of logic as somebody who devotes himself to math. They will say calculators are fine, they're efficient tools, but it would be good to know how the long division, right? To understand something about the process, not just the end. So that sometimes when something goes wrong, just like orthoscopic surgery, they've had in Boston at MGH, they've had some surgeons work on people who are in different countries, like maybe sometimes either Iraq or Afghanistan, telesurgery. The video game example that I've heard much more of, which I also have some evidence for because one of my students was a drone operator, is that's almost a one-to-one changeover, right? I mean, flying I and maybe others used to scoff at the idea that drone pilots are experiencing PTSD, but they are some who are experiencing more often than actual pilots. In part, that distance and the awareness of that kind of distance and following. There's a really good movie that actually captures this pretty well. It's Eye in the Sky with Helen Mirren and a few others. You know, that distancing. I mentioned something about it in a sort of a question comment to Bob as we continue to mediate ourselves from those things. But boy, I mean, there are military games. I mean, America's Army, that the Army puts out, that, you know, they're paying attention to how people are doing in those games, and it's a recruitment mechanism, right? Because some of these skills, these interfaces, sometimes quite impoverished interfaces, but, well, that's what war has become, highly mediated and impoverished in a way, the way that you do it, right? Bushido code, looking your opponent in the eye before you fight and potentially kill him, to know him, to know something about the seriousness of taking another life versus pulling the trigger, or even letting go of the string. There's a whole continuum through history we can look at with increased mediation of killing and the abstraction of killing. I don't see us going back. So yes, those will become the skills that you. So maybe that baby that's just doing that kind of thing will be good for a certain type of task, right? I'm a big fan of George Dyson. He wrote a book in the late 1996, Darwin Among the Machines, and he said, in every way that humans make computers easier to control, there's a feedback loop. Computers are making humans easier to control, right? Sort of categorize and all of that. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Nice, thank you.
Anyone else?
Sam, I was interested in your work because I didn't know what a telenovela was until Jane the Virgin came on the scene, and my kids and I watched it via Netflix. And I haven't really thought about it until in this context, till I heard your presentation, but I've been so curious to see how that show, which you might sort of easily dismiss as being sort of very light and silly and very, very fast moving, they've handled, they've talked about abortion, they've talked about grief, and perhaps some of the most realistic and meaningful to real life ways I've ever seen portrayed. It's really, so then as I was listening to you, I wondered if that medium, because they do sort of, it seems open, it seems like they take risks. That's the impression that I've had from watching it. It's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, and Jane the Virgin is interesting because it is a telenovela, but it really isn't.
But it doesn't mean many of you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's relative,
And so
right? To
they play with the common tropes, and they make it really funny, but they are more risque as far as their content, because I think that the audience for this show is not the audience for just any show.
Yes, and I totally recognize that as your, but yet still they're able to be different, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and they're very timely, I would say, with Jane the Virgin, in tackling current issues and doing some hashtags.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I'll ask about
Well,
360,
okay, yeah.
360 films. I wasn't aware they actually were doing film now, 360. Do they follow kind of some sort of traditional narrative pattern for film, or is it just, I put on a headset one night and kind of stepped into a couple of just really short, 30-second type clips, but are they actually developing full-length films and follow some sort of narrative?
Did you do the roller coaster one?
I did, it was Avengers or something like that, where you're in a room and the Hulk's breaking through and things are going on all around you. It's really interesting.
Yeah. So YouTube, their platform has allowed 360 uploads for about 2 years. Vimeo just opened up on their platform, I think, in March of this year. So the distribution mechanism is so youthful. However, you're seeing a lot of sponsored content. For example, Sprint last Halloween did a really interesting piece where there was a seance taking place down in the basement, and you were sort of with them in their seance, and then there's all kinds of little things that are triggering around you. So sound's going to really play an important issue to sort of make you see something over here and then come back and something's gone. And they did that one really well. So I've seen a few pieces like that. I haven't seen like a feature yet.
Okay.
And I'm gonna just end it right here. It is lunchtime. For the Founders Board members, we're gonna be meeting over by the coffee station. I'm gonna take you guys over to that lunch. Everybody else, lunch is at Oliver, which is where breakfast was this morning. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.